to introduce our speaker of the month, Mrs. Seetha Ananthasivan. Seetha is the founder of Prakriya Green Wisdom School and also Bhoomi College. So she has an abiding interest in building curricula for ecological learning and culture building and applying ecological principles to communities and individuals. So thereby, to enable a life which to live harmoniously with nature. So she has worked with the World Wildlife Fund India, and since then she has been involved with culture building for ecological living in educational institutions. So she is also the founder of Sankalan Center for Inner and Outer Ecology and is committed to working with holistic education, sustainable economics and agriculture. So she strives to conserve nature and supports localization as a means to cope up with the unsustainable and rampant ways of globalization through various initiatives. So over to you, Seetha. I think you can carry it forward now.
Okay.
Please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kalyani, for that very elaborate introduction. And I hope that the talk today is meaningful in some way, because this kind of sharing I'm doing for the first time. We've talked a lot about the ecological work and, work on sustainability for both the school and Prakriya School and Bhoomi College. But we have using Indian frameworks also, but not really put it together in any kind of, in a talk or any such thing. So thank you, Poorna, and to create this forum called Samaagama, and also Kalyani, and all the people who are attending today. And I wish to state at the beginning that we have worked on these kind of things that I'm going to talk about for the last more than 20 years actually. But as I said, since it's not put together, any of you have any feedback or want to poke some holes in what I'm saying, I'll be most grateful if you do. Yeah. So to start with, I think I can start the PPT now, Kalyani.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think, yeah, I like to stop in between and after presenting a bit of a chunk of stuff, right? So our focus today, my focus today is on how we have tried to learn, also apply certain frameworks from the Indian culture, and also certain perspectives in our school. While we are a kind of, you can say, the normal kind of modern schooling is embedded in the kind of work we do, because we are an ICSE school. Yet we have attempted to do a lot, because we have no choice. If we don't have a syllabus of some kind, and later on I'll come to how the very syllabus curriculum of the kind of boards we have goes against the Indian way of thinking. But yet we have no choice, because we won't have any children if we don't follow some syllabus or the other. That's the situation we have reached today. So yeah, the next one, Kalyan. So I'll give a little bit of a background about the Prakriya, the school, because a lot of the work that we've done is through Prakriya, in Prakriya. And I think some of my colleagues who have worked with me for in Prakriya are also here. So actually, it has been a collaborative work over a period of time. And to start with, Prakriya means process. And we also think of it as Prakriti plus Kriya, meaning acting as per nature's wisdom. Yeah, next. Next one, Kalyan.
Yeah, I have changed it. Are you all able to see?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So here, our focus has been to create a space to foster ecological or green wisdom, as the name of the school says. And we have attempted it in multiple ways. I think the reason is pretty obvious why we believe that schools need to focus on sustainability and living harmoniously on Earth. And another focus has been to humanize education. Um, if you look at children today coming out of schools, in schools, we find that there are quite a few who seem to enjoy it, those who are good at academics and who are able to fit into a very structured system. But many, many more are not that happy. They seem to feel that they have no choice, so they just have to go through school. It's like almost being put into a machine, and a whole lot of processes are taken place, and then they come out in the end. And we have seen, many of us, I'm sure here in this group would have seen, that many children are also crushed, their spirits are crushed by the education system. And we feel that to humanize it, it's not just a matter of course, it's a systemic issue. To really work with it, we need to work with the syllabus, work with the exam system, and a whole lot more, which seems a lot more difficult today to do for any single school or a group of schools or anything. And till that changes, as a school, one can still do certain things to humanize the process and see that the children's spirit doesn't get so bruised. But we feel that for both of these kind of focus areas we have, mobilizing certain Indic frameworks can be of great use, can be very valuable, quite simply because it is important to be in touch with our roots for our well-being. I'll come to more of this later. Yeah, next. So here, just as an example, I thought I'll give how we use the Panchamahabhutas as a framework for learning in Prakriya, particularly because it was a talk by Mr. Darshan Shankar on Indian scientific framework of the Panchabhutas, which can be considered an alternative to the Western scientific framework, which goes into studying every segment and atoms and everything in order to see the whole, whereas the Indian system has been one where you look at the whole and look at processes and the constant change, and still try to understand some basic factors that seem to influence every ecosystem, every person, every aspect of Earth. And that's where we had used the Panchamahabhutas almost from the very beginning of the school, but I had heard of a lot more in yoga and Ayurveda. But what he talked about was even in soil sciences, even in metallurgy, and many fields in India, the Panchamahabhutas are used as a framework, framework of science in India, a more holistic one, or what he calls it's based on a field theory, not on an atomic theory. So I just thought, very briefly, to give people something to a context of Prakriya to look at. We have used this a whole lot, and especially in all the classes up to class 4. We don't have, subjects like science and different science, what do you call it, biology or physics or any of them, of course. Normally in the smaller classes, it's a general science, but all these are covered, and nor history and geography and so on. But instead, we work on some of these kind of things through the 5 themes of Prithvi, Jal, Vayu, Agni, and Akash. And this gives us a lot of room to do a lot of creative work. It's an open-ended framework which teachers can continue to contribute to. It can, if we do, let's say, the theme of Jal for a couple of months, or, it's usually during the monsoon time, from dancing in the rain to singing songs about water to, or rivers to, understanding the water cycle, a whole lot of things are done, which anyway will be covered in the usual lessons. But in the usual textbooks, things are very kind of segmented, like the first 2-3 lessons in a science book, maybe, let's say, on plants or seeds or some such thing. And then suddenly they jump to animals and birds and so on, So there is no, the idea is to mimic the learning from nature, learning from real life as much as possible. While it's not possible in an ICSE school fully, but yet to a large extent, you can work with these through the teams. So that is one of the kind of things we do, which fills up a whole lot of our curriculum creation in the smaller classes, And even this goes into the languages, because you can have a Kannada song on, on rivers or water, or you can have, you can do multiple things in different groups. Maths also you can take this in. So that's just to give you an idea of, some of the ways in which we work. And now I think I'll go on to some bit of the basic frameworks and why we believe it is important. So can we go to the next one? No, so in this talk, I thought I'll divide it into 2 parts. And one is about the conceptual basis for this. Now, I'm sure in this group, most of you must be quite enlightened. You may not need to understand this. You will know it intuitively, or you might have worked with it. But I'm just putting it down for to spell out some of the details of what we are thinking about. And the second part is some bit of the application of processes and ideas. One little bit I have shared about the, how we use the Panchamahabhutas as themes in the smaller classes. So, and after every part, maybe I'll stop for any questions or remarks to listen to from others. Yeah. Okay, next. Yeah. So for the school, there are 2 basic premises that, 3 of them basically, and 1 more 4, on which our work is based. And the first one is that every culture needs to consciously mobilize its positives and build on them to unfold and progress in a wholesome way. Now, this may be quite easily understood, but why I'm just stating it is that for me, first time I heard it was from one of my professors, Professor Pulin Garg, who worked a lot with, self-exploration as well as culture building. And he, when he first mentioned it, when I was hardly about 22 or 23, I've never forgotten it from then. Because somewhere nobody else had said this to me before, In school, we had a whole lot of textbooks, and many of the, at least the time when, nowadays it's much better, but when I was studying, a whole lot of books were only by English authors. Even English textbooks, all the stories and articles, essays were from, from some country other than India. Hardly anything was from India. And the general feeling was all knowledge came from the West, or Western knowledge is superior, And it's as if so many things, even when it came from India, like I remember when I was studying trigonometry, I was very fond of trigonometry. And the textbook was written by one Hall and Knight, And my mother, who hardly bothered about my studies, happened to see the book, and she knew a bit of Sanskrit. So she told me, oh, you know something? Trigonometry came from Trigona Miti, It is first developed in India, and nowhere was it mentioned in that book, that this came from India. And similarly, a whole lot of things later on, I realized that how much, the Western colonial system, now all of us know about it. So, I mean, the colonial rule has affected our education. All of us know about Macaulay, and it was almost to uproot the existing educational wisdom that was there in India and replace it with everything different. So when I heard this first time from Professor Pullen, I really realized this is something very important that we need to work with. And we need to move. It's not to kind of go gaga and, only be blindfolded to the negatives and see only the positive, only the greatness of India and only talk about it or feel better than anybody else. The idea is to have a realistic view and to say, can we mobilize the positives in the culture? I'm not saying that no negatives exist, because in India, it has become fashionable to, moment you say anything positive, people are jumping to say, oh, but India was like that, India was like this. So was every country. Every country had its own negatives and positives. And yet, not everybody disregards their positives simply because there was slavery or there was feudalism or there was something or the other in the country, So it's something we need to take seriously, is a strong belief that we have had. And I'll go on to the next point here, because you can say a whole lot more, but as I said, we are quite aware of what Macaulayan education has done to India. Now, the second thing, the purpose of education, today, definitely, it was always so, but today with climate change and a whole lot of various kinds of ecological damage, be it for the soil, the air, the rivers, whatever, that we are seeing every day. We need to, I believe that education needs to focus strongly on living harmoniously, living sustainably. And finally, I think this I can say it best in the words of Swami Vivekananda: you cannot make a child learn any more than you can make a plant grow. You can only help it to grow in its own way, Now, it looks like modern education simply doesn't believe in this, whereas in the Indian system, Swabhava and Swadharma, that each child has to follow his or her own path or may have different interests, is not really taken very seriously, at least in the majority of the schools. So if these three things are assumptions that we have worked with. And the fourth one is about how experiential learning in early childhood is essential, for all of these and more. Because more than anything else, one of the things that is neglected by the education system is that nowadays neuroscientists say that 95% to 98 or 99% of our behavior is determined by our subconscious minds. And our subconscious minds are, quite a bit of it is formed in early childhood, of course from the families, but also in schools and so on. So it's not enough, One of the reasons perhaps why it is very difficult to, to get people to, adopt sustainable living practices is that we are learning it in a cognitive way. We are learning the content from somewhere. We read about it. We may even study it in school. But that doesn't mean that our subconscious minds, have been affected strongly, that is important. And we have been used to something else. Our minds have been used to non-sustainable living, whether it is the way we use water or vehicles or the kind of consumerism we are in. And those habits, in a simpler word for subconscious minds, is a whole lot of habits that we are unwilling to let go of. addictions that we are unwilling to let go of. We can call it addiction, be it white rice or a monthly salary or any kind of junk food or various things. Human beings are highly prone to addictions, and also in a positive way. In early childhood, if we are used to doing certain kind of things, certain beliefs, certain way in which everybody, let's say, takes care of water usage or anything, it gets into the person. I mean, I'm not saying it's a, all or nothing thing that everybody learns it perfectly, but that's the best we can do. So experiential learning, not only because the child enjoys learning that way, but also for these purposes. I mean, for these to work with these kind of beliefs, we need more experiential learning. So these are the premises with which we work in the school, which we started. Yeah, next one. So, yeah, to build further on that, so if we believe that these aspects of education are important, then we need to distinguish between content and process. We need content and process, anything we do, almost anything, and also in schools. But if you look at it, the school curriculum builders have largely thought only about content, and not about learning from living, learning from doing, and various other processes. And the second thing is we need to understand the difference between frameworks used in modern education and in traditional education in India. This is more to, kind of spell it out. I know a whole lot of people, maybe a whole lot of people here who are in alternative schools intuitively understand and work on all of these things. But I think it's important to conceptualize and present, and therefore I thought I'll just go through with the detailing of it. And finally, the importance of building a coherent culture as a context in which we live and learn. Because again, a whole lot more is focused on in curriculum, syllabus, exams, and so on, rather than in building a culture. I will work on it a little bit more later. Yeah, next, Kalyani. So if we look at modern education, I'll just run through it fairly fast, except, because I think, again, it's, okay, I'll just run through it. So the first thing is, I think, what Mr. Darshan Shankar really dwelt upon in the last Samaagama talk, where, it's based on the modern scientific framework of atomic view of matter, and how that Western framework was built on understanding phenomena by studying the material components. It left out a whole lot, whether it is feeling, intuition, much else. It is said that during the Middle Ages, in the West, when there was a lot of persecution of scientists by the church, Descartes was the person who, I think he's the one who said, "I think, therefore I am," or, some such thing. And he negotiated with the church to say, well, let the church deal with matters of the spirit, and scientists will deal with matter, So a big split happened then. And instead of studying anything in a holistic way, this whole process of studying matter bit by bit to understand the universe, so to speak, began, And on that, this is why the foundations and the seeding of anything, be it institution or any kind of activity, is so important, because that seeding can continue right through for centuries, and it's kind of colonized everybody's minds so much. And as Mr. Shankar said in the last talk, how there could be alternative frameworks too. Framework which studies the ecosystem or the person live, not in dead pieces of matter. So this aspect of education has also given our obsession with measurement in education, marks and exams, and and in fact, it is said that in Europe, when Vienna was a center of scientific advancement, scientists were completely discouraged from studying anything which could not be measured. So only something which could be measured had value. And yet we all know, and like for instance, Einstein is the one who said that what counts cannot be counted, So while it is known in pockets, on the whole, the direction was set of, on an obsession with measurement. And it was not possible. I mean, people didn't get much respect for even psychology and sociology. People tried to make it a science, when there was a very large element of issues and experiences which could not be measured in the usual way. So that's another aspect of modern education. And another one is the exclusion of content of Indian knowledge and achievements, And this has left us with a mixed feeling about Indic culture. And this is not the topic of this talk, so I won't go into it. But I think we need to also add content. When I talk about process, is very, very important, but it doesn't mean that content can be left out. But the content of Indian knowledge, I mean, what has happened in Indian sciences or maths, as well as in understanding of life, understanding of consciousness, and many other things. India has worked far ahead, yoga, Ayurveda. India has done so much work, and only now there seems to be a bit of a revival in the last maybe 10, 15 years, a stronger revival than before. And all this has robbed us of our pride in our roots and left feeling inferior to the West. So there are multiple reasons why we need to focus on Indic frameworks. That's what I'm trying to say here, because modern education is not doing enough for us. In fact, it's doing a lot of harm. Yeah. Next. So to run through what I said, modern education is over focused on content, curriculum, syllabus, textbooks, exams, methods of teaching, standardized infrastructure in all schools. The same kind of infrastructure is required everywhere. It doesn't matter that, in a rainforest area or in a sea coast or in the hills, you need very different learning and so on. And finally, modern education is also a child of reductionist science. What we talked about Descartes, it's reducing science and studying bit by bit to understand the whole, rather than study it in a holistic way. Today, there are people who have begun to work on holistic science, particularly, some of us have heard of Schumacher College. And under holistic science, a whole lot of work is done, and especially in, say, complexity theory, because all these ways of focusing on content seem to undervalue the complexity of real life, complexity of nature, complexity of our bodies, of our thinking, of our psychology, and everything. It's trying to simplify things. So you need a more holistic science, which I think India has a lot to offer in this area, but through very different frameworks. Unfortunately, the same Western frameworks frames or filters are used to study the Indian ones. So sometimes it doesn't measure up. But we need very different ways to understand the Indian sciences. So that is one part. And the second part is, what is the purpose of modern education? Here, I think I'd like to just share a story which I heard from an Englishman who said, it's documented somewhere, but I have not really managed to lay my hands on where and how it is documented. But he said that when Industrial Revolution began and various textile mills and other things started in Manchester and the other places in England, Yeah.
Yes.
So this purpose of modern education bit, I was talking about the story of the beginnings of this kind of modern education, where apparently many people who had been farmers, doing various works in rural areas, they were called in to work in the new factories. So they were the first generation workers, and they found it was very difficult to get them to come to work on time, or they got bored with the work and they left. And they didn't mind when their salary was cut or something. They didn't mind because they were never used to a salary anyway. They could go back to their farming or anything else, and so on. And there's no fear of authority because of this. So the thinkers of the time got together and said, I mean, exactly what we are saying, but probably in different words, that from early childhood, that is an impressionable time for the child. One has to train people to be able to work in factories because they could see the factories could become a major aspect of life in the future. And not only factories for whatever spinning and weaving, but a whole lot more of factories. So they decided that early schooling should have at least these three things. One was the school bell, because people had no respect for time earlier. So they said people must respect time. So then came the school bell. Till then, there was no bell in any educational situation. And second thing was that they should get used to respecting authority. And if you see the old pictures of school, the teacher would always hold a stick or a ruler in her hands, because to inculcate the fear in children. And the third thing was to get children used to boring work, and that getting used to boring work, not necessarily what they like to do, but you have to write out something 20 times, you have to write it out. And it is true. From childhood, when we are doing such things, we get used to boring work. We don't want more, we don't care for more interesting work. So many of us are even scared of anything new, So if you look at it, the purpose of education then was to get people kind of prepared to work in the industrial system. Even today, it remains much the same. The purpose of education seems to be to help people get a job, not well-being, not something greater for the earth or for the community, but it is basically, and it's become so extreme that it's almost very, very difficult to reverse, except when people do it on their own speed, as it has happened after COVID and things like that. At least a small handful are rethinking what their life should be like. Yeah, next.
Talking about the purposes of modern education and getting children used to boring work.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that this is actually recorded, documented stuff in England. So just look at the power of seeding, and we tend to repeat what is handed down to us. So there is a need to rethink a lot about the purpose of education. But again, coming back to the focus of this talk, let's sort of compare it with the basic tenets of Indic culture, the culture that has been sort of completely pushed aside in building our modern education system. And my concern has been that, yes, many people are trying to add, Indian music or Indian dance or shlokas or something more, but there is a whole lot more that we need to try and understand, because it's an ocean, but we can try to do a bit more, and for which I think we have to go to this, what was seeded in our culture. It's not just what is practical and what is convenient today. I'm sure we may end up there anyway, but still to keep in mind some of the fundamentals of the Indic culture. And when I say this, I'm saying it a little tentatively, because I'm not saying that all of us are following this. I'm not saying that this is the only thing or this is it. But you find some of these, aims of the of life, as it were, embedded in so many aspects of our culture today, the expressions of the culture, whether it is in dance or music or so many of the spiritual systems, in yoga, in Ayurveda. Wherever you go, you realize that these kind of things are, sort of embedded in them. They may not be spelt out all the time, but we may just follow Ayurveda for certain reasons when something is not okay in us. But if you look at really how people are doing it, it's not that they don't focus on results, but the over focus is not on results. The focus is on doing things right for the body, doing what is wholesome and good for our living processes every day, and then the body is able to work on itself and whatever, get rid of the pain or the problem or whatever. So if you look at some of the tenets, I've just put down a few. I'm sure there's a whole lot more to talk about. But more or less, many of them seem to cohere in a particular way, and this is the opposite of what can be measured. This is the opposite of, specifics which we can get out of life, neither material nor money nor anything else, but it's maybe on the whole, it's in the direction of well-being. So, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita message is to do your work, but don't over-focus on results. Aham Brahmasmi, which is one of the, what is called, some primary statements of the Vedas, Mahavakyas of the Vedas, really means that, in a way, every being is sacred, everything is sacred. The whole universe is in me, and therefore, and the land, the rocks, the trees, every aspect of life is sacred, and living harmoniously with nature is part of the culture. Again, it's not that that's happening in a perfect way all over the country. We know that there's been a lot of mix of things happening, and the earlier culture could have been overridden. And anyway, these are not some things that can be followed perfectly, but the direction is there. So you will find, like, for instance, the Saras crane is worshipped somewhere in, I think, Gujarat, or elephants and, peacocks, or snakes for that matter. So many of them, they're all made into the vahanas of gods, and many of them are worshipped. And in multiple ways, there was an acceptance that we are only, one part of nature, that we don't rule nature, and therefore we have to cohere with nature around us. So that is, again, part of this Indic culture. Another two things which are maybe, again, in today's world of looking at what is practical and, useful in day-to-day life, and does it get me does it help me earn a living, and so on, maybe the questions. But yet the aim of life, if you look at it in the Indian system, in the Indian culture, is to connect the individual with the divine. So the whole concept of individual consciousness to connect it with the universal consciousness was a direction. And you'll find innumerable songs on this theme. You will find, whether it is dance, whether it is yoga. Yoga also is talking about connecting, the same thing, the individual with the divine, and or whatever name you call it, the universal, and so on. Today, if you look at it, modern science, quantum physics is talking, in line with this way of thinking. We again can't go into it here, but however, even if it is known to a few, these things don't come very easily into a whole juggernaut of an education system and economic system that we have. The next part is a continuation of the first, the epitome of achievement. Today, epitome of achievement is Bill Gates, he's the richest, or Ambani, he's the richest, and so on and so forth. Or somebody wins scores so much in cricket, or has won so many tennis matches. Epitome of achievement is universally become the outer achievement. But there was a time in the Indian society, even now to a large extent, to some extent, that the inner achievement of somebody, they said the most respected person would be the smallest consumer, would bother least about how he looks and wear the minimum clothes. Of course, there was Gandhiji. There are so many people like this who embodied that for us. But today it's like, you know, Gandhiji is to be put there as a father of the nation, or so many other, you know, the great spiritual leaders we've had. They're all not meant to emulate or look at or understand except by a select few. So the epitome of achievement being the outer achievement is embedded in the school through the achievement of marks and whatnot. And then it goes on to achievement in other ways. And overall, if you say the focus is on the being, you know, on who am I, and not on doing and having alone. Doing and having is necessary for life, but that's not the end of life. No? So these are the basic tenets of the Indian culture. And it seems when you look at all of them, you can even laugh, because where are they in education or economics or anything today? You know? But I think somewhere to keep these things in mind as we design our curriculum or whatever, it may not be a magic wand, but it can definitely have a lot of value. Yeah, next. So I've just put down a whole lot of these. So, you know, again, this is not something which, what do I say? You can call it my opinion if you please. It's not something which is been affirmed by anybody's great work or research, but just a few things that we put together, and some of them are pretty obvious though, you know. So if you look at the Indic framework for education, it was more process-based and content-based, you know. It was not the whole obsession with content and measurement was not there. So Western framework, however, is more content-based. And if you look at Ayurveda or yoga, there is much, it's like based on holistic thinking. So if you go to an Ayurveda doctor with a particular problem, he won't say, okay, where is the pain, and touch that portion of the stomach and then prescribe a pill or an antibiotic. They would ask you a whole lot of questions. They would ask you about how you sleep, and are you stressed out? Are you, you know, they would ask you about your stools, you know, how they are, observe them, and they would talk about the food you eat. They talk about a whole lot of things, and then try to also perhaps check your pulse and identify what is your basic prakriti, what is your basic nature, you know, whether it is more of vata or pitta or kapha or combinations, and then look at dealing with your body as a whole, you know. That's what I mean, like, you know, there is much more holistic thinking and not segmented or reductionist thinking, which has made us today, when for the smallest cold or problem, people run to the doctor and get an antibiotic. And it may solve the problem immediately, but in the long run, it can create more damage or more problems too. The third metaphor is an interesting one. This again, I was introduced to by my professor, Pulin Garg, 30-40 years ago. Simultaneity and multiplicity are, you know, important metaphors of thought in the Indic system, not either or. What is meant by this is, you know, there are a lot of dichotomies that are there in the West, whether it is rational, irrational, good, bad, you know, believer, pagan, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the Indian system, there is a what can be called simultaneity or multiplicity, which also, if you really look at it, is what has made India a lot more tolerant traditionally. You know, people may contest these kind of things today, but yet even today in the world, if you look at it, there is a lot of acceptance of various religions, and which is why, for instance, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on are not so very concerned with conversion, because there is acceptance of the simultaneity of different people being able to live. Let there be a multiplicity of religions, because ultimately the end is the same, connecting with the same consciousness. There is no difference. Whereas where the cultures were into an either or system, it's like either you believe in this or you are a pagan. And hence there was a need to conquer and to, to conquer as well as to convert, or to say I am better than you, and so on, in multiple ways, because either I am right or you're right. Now, can we, the Indian system is a lot more, as you can see, even in the ways very different cultures have joined in, or the way the Indian culture is accepted elsewhere, there is a lot of this simultaneity and multiplicity. You can also see it in the number of gods and goddesses we have, we can keep creating them, I've heard that this Santoshi Ma was a newly created goddess in the last century. There was no such goddess before, and now she's quite popular. So there is room for many more, and hence it's not either this god or either my god or yours. There could be a lot of, and that has spilled over into a lot more things, And I'm not therefore saying that everything is perfect. There are places where this is not followed also, And next such metaphor of thought or framework of thought is synthesis, and versus, in a sense, conquest, because synthesis, as in India, is known for a lot synthesized. Like, for instance, I think Hindi and Persian we've synthesized to make Urdu, And even now, if you look at how much English has been accepted into the Indian psyche, as it were, we synthesize it, accept it very easily. And I feel, while it is important to give, to see that the remaining Indian languages don't die out, but yet I don't think we need to worry too much about, English having taken over in such a big way, because even within English, we can have Indic frameworks of thought, So these frameworks, I feel, are a lot more important. Rather than only the content part, some of the superficials. Another aspect of the Indic framework is growth. Human beings, by our very nature, will grow. We need to grow. We do not know how not to grow, generation after generation, or in our own lives, in stage after stage, or wherever, growth is natural, because our brains are constructed that way. And how much, I don't know whether people in their wisdom realize that a never-ending outer growth is a disaster for life, or was it something intuitively they just went in for it? There are like maybe hundreds or even thousands of disciplines and methods or ways of working with inner growth in India. There are so many Swamijis doing so many things, a whole lot of them. And again, not to say that there is nothing corrupt there, but the inner growth was a major focus. And in the in the West, as we all see today, because content and materials were always more important, outer growth is the real measure of growth. So outer growth as well as conquest, because conquering another nation is a way of growing, right? So conquest, and even conquest of nature, it was almost codified, I think, by Lord Bacon or somebody, that it is man's right to conquer nature, Whereas here we try to harmonize, synthesize, as in trying to connect with the nature around us and, trying to live as best we can. And yeah, that's for the growth part. And one more I've added, which is the scientific framework. Again, spelling out the same thing that Darshan Shankar talked about, that the scientific framework of studying the parts and putting them together to attempt to understand the whole was the basic scientific framework in the West. Whereas in India, it has been the Pancha Mahabhutas, where you study the system, the ecosystem, the person, the organism whole, and understand its nature through these 5 elements. So in doing so, we accept the whole picture, the interconnections, the constant change, the aliveness, and not feel also very arrogant that we can study everything and put it together and we are the biggest creatures in the world. So that's for some frameworks of thought, just to compare both of them. So can we go to the next one? So we are nearing the end of the first part, which I talked about, working with the conceptual basis. I think looking at all this, one thing is not to again get into this versus that, although I put it in that form, because the Western ways of thinking are very much with us. They are in us, the way we are using a computer, or way we have so much of it, like a whole lot of Western thinking is embedded in it too. But we need to integrate Western and Eastern frameworks. That is the genius of India, of synthesis, of accepting the simultaneity, and so on. So how we integrate what we integrate, there can be a whole lot to do. It's an ocean. But maybe the idea is not to create models, but to create open-ended frameworks through which different people can do different things. Yeah, next one. Next one, Kalyani. That we need to consciously build culture in a school to integrate Indic frameworks. Just adding some Indian content is not enough. I think very often many schools do try to do some of this, but essentially nothing has changed in the curriculum, which to some extent I agree, it's very difficult, especially in the higher classes. But there is a lot more that can be done to both humanize education and to bring in a greater, pride in our roots, and also greater ecological wisdom in schools. A whole lot can be done, and for all of this we need to build culture, which we will come to in the next part. Yeah, so I think we will stop here, and if there are any, shall we do that? Stop here, and if anyone wants to raise any question or anything, we'll deal with that. Because in the next part, I'm trying to just share a bit about how we have worked on it in Prakriya.
Yeah, I think it'll be nice to take in maybe 2 or 3 questions. Seetha, I'll leave it to you. Yeah, Kalyani, please moderate if there are questions.
Yeah, Indira. So all of you, anyone who has questions, you could please go ahead and ask, or if you want, you could type also.
Does any of it make sense? Or is it seeming too far-fetched from, what education is supposed to be today?
Yeah.
Good morning. Hi, this is Tarannum here. I joined late, but the way you have shared the frameworks and acknowledging both Indian culture and things needed to be incorporated, and also taking into consideration the Western framework, it does give me a very beautiful lens of how to execute things in the lower primary. And you also acknowledging simultaneously that we also, like, it does become difficult when we look at things that needs to be incorporated in the higher classes. But I feel as an educator, if these things are given in the primary grades, definitely it does help the child in the higher grades also. So the foundation is in the lower grades when you look at it. So I'm looking forward to the further discussion where you will be sharing your experiences. It's a beautiful lens that you have given right now, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm mostly silent because it resonates with so much of what we've been doing at Poorna. I feel like calling you Seetha, my sister. Yeah. And the question is, as you said, of seeding. And I just wanted to ask you, maybe you can take it later, but how well, again, to use the same frameworks that you've been sort of critiquing, but how effective has this seeding been in your experience, and what makes it take root, if I can use that metaphor? Yeah.
Okay. I think, if you look at farming or gardening, we not only do seeding, but there are times when we have to do reseeding, mix the soil up again and again do reseeding. So a lot of the work we do, it doesn't mean this seeding and then everything grows in a particular way. There's need to constantly work on many things, which I will come to in the next part, So, but it is, I mean, we still feel it's important to do the seeding, and maybe periodically we have to stop and take stock of ourselves and work at renewal. That is a work of again remulching and putting in some manure and mixing up and and reseeding periodically.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, thank you. There is another question on the chat. I don't know if it's a question, it's more of a comment.
Yeah. So, Ms. Zankhana, if you could read it out yourself.
Yes. Namaste, Seetha ji and everyone here. Thank you for your excellent presentation and sharing your thoughts. So I come from an Ayurveda background, and I could relate very much to what you were sharing from the Indic framework and the perspectives that could come in education. The same thing that now India is moving towards one health system. There's a vision by 2030 that India would have a seamlessly integrated system of medicine. You have all the disciplines working together. A similar framework, do you think, should also be applied to education, where there is seamless integration, where, as per your last slide, what you said, that not just that some contents are simply added, but it is so amalgamated in a way that when the child grows, right from the lower classes to across, that there is no difference. And it's a wishful thinking though, but I think if this thought is a lot more pronounced and shared, like the system of medicine, even education in years to come may change.
Yeah. That is a big question to answer. And I think that is really work for many, many people. Yes. But my brief response is that I don't know really, but perhaps in education it's even more difficult than in medicine, to integrate.
That is true.
Yeah, because in medicine sometimes it's quite easily possible to say, if I have this kind of an accident, allopathy is needed at this moment, or this kind of a surgery, allopathy is needed. But the holistic approach of other, many alternative medicine systems takes a very different approach. And but it's still possible to integrate. And I myself know, and I myself in my family have seen it. Sometimes the allopathy has been useful, but even if we are mostly with naturopathy or Ayurveda or something. So it's a kind of a modular approach is possible, I think, in medicine.
And since Prakriya is very strong, right, more than content at the process, that fundamental process which is there, I think that like-minded unions, like maybe we as parents and volunteers could also contribute towards this more as we get along.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that, you know, I mean, to go back to your first part, that, you know, in education, as I was saying, it's a lot more difficult because the
Yes,
fundamental aims are different. You
true.
know, unless the education changes its the centralized education itself, you know, kills diversity. We are, you know, and diversity, unity in diversity is another one of the metaphors of India, you know. And you can have something similar, but something very different. I mean,
Correct.
again, quoting from the, let's say, the Indian epics, if you see Ramayana, there are literally 1,000 versions of Ramayana, but the essential story is the same. Like this, you know, even in education, there could be so many different things happening in different schools. But the centralized system wants to put the same, you know, people even talk very proudly and talk big about we shall have the same education across the country. I mean, it's the saddest thing to happen. You know?
Correct.
So,
Personalized, yeah.
yeah, in education, the aims seem to be a little widely different. So that's why in Prakriya, we call it like riding two horses, you know. If you have spent so much time taming those two horses, you can sit on the two and go together. Otherwise, it's not easy when you're sitting on this horse to be on that horse as well, you know. So, but yet, you know, once these thoughts come to us, we are not able to give them up. We try our bit, you know, to try and integrate, but at a larger level, I really do not know. Maybe as more and more people start feeling that you need something else for well-being other than the present education system is only a handmaiden of our economic system. So unless these systems change, it's not going to be easy to have an economic system for well-being, you know. Yeah.
And that's the key, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, what shall we do, Kalyani?
So I mean, if there are no more questions, then you want to proceed to the next part?
Yeah, sure.
So shall I present the screen?
The second part is, as we said, about application of some of these ideas. And, you know, between an idea and its application falls a shadow. It's not so easy, many of the things we say, especially because we are riding two horses, you know. So, and also the many aspects of building culture in a school. That's what I'm trying to share now. Yeah, next one. So, you know, the culture is very often, you know, thought of as, say, cultural programs it comes from, you know, and but the music and dance and everything else in many places that is considered the culture. They're only cultural expressions. The real meaning of culture, as we are looking at it here, is the context that we are living in, you know. It is all over. And the culture of a place is something we absorb osmotically, something that influences our subconscious minds over a period of time. And it's not something, you know, that is very easily definable. It is all around us. So, which is why I tried to put down, and we did this once for the school to look at what is culture, you know, in sessions with the teachers, that if you look at it in the middle, there is a kind of a fish tank, you know, and outside is a larger body of water with more fish. But the inside fish tank has, what do you call it, like a mesh. It's not a, you know, a glass tank or a tank which is holding the water separately. So in a way, we can talk about it. At most, when we say building culture in a school, we are talking about building, if we can call it that, a microculture within a school. And yes, a whole lot of alternative schools try to do that, whether they call it that or not. And the outside culture, the macro culture, is always flowing in and out, you know. And this is something, you know, the fish is definitely, the quality of water affects the health of the fish, what is happening in the fish. So if we look at culture like this, then there are so many more things. Culture is not any one thing and you can fix it. There is a whole way of life, as it were, we have to look at. And it does affect our subconscious mind. Like, for instance, you can say living with nature and living in a city with, where you're all the time seeing man-made objects, geometrical, like buildings with geometrical shapes and concrete all over, and living in nature where you see a whole lot more of complexity. You'll see 100 shades of green, which you won't inside a building. And the mind somehow is affected by the culture of, say, living in a forest and the culture of living in a city. Your mind tends to become a whole lot more linear, a whole lot more what do you call it, content based, and so on. So we're talking about a very difficult issue, because as even today, not only in our country, the world over, they're talking about getting 80% of the people into cities and so on. And India is perhaps fortunate till now, unfortunate in other ways, that still a large part of our population is in the villages. Can you imagine what would happen if a whole lot more people just become more programmable, is what I think. I may be wrong, but the more you live in a structured environment, the more you become programmable. And the more you live in an unstructured, complex environment, original thinking and being, well-being, all that can take on a different hue. So similarly with communities, human beings are meant to live in communities. Now, communities have been almost systematically broken in the process of moving from villages to cities. And communities are still there, I'm not saying not there, and much more so in India compared to many other countries. And today psychologists are saying the single thing that can add to the well-being of a person a lot, considering especially the mental illnesses in the West are, increasing so much more, considering they're such advanced countries, the mental illness rate is much more. And how, being in the community itself is therapeutic. So our communities are dying. So these are the ways in which culture affects us, in living in a community, living in nature, and how it can affect our subconscious minds. Again, there's hardly any talk about subconscious mind. It's as if we are all living in a vacuum and we have to learn ABC and whatever else in schools, In other words, we are treated like machines which can be programmed, So if you look at culture like this, then we can sort of try to look at how we can work with culture in a school in so many different ways. Yeah, so next. No, this is not, okay. So having generally talked about what we are, our struggle with, building the microculture of a school, there are some of these things which we have worked with, which, as I said, I can talk from some of the experiences that we've had. So one is the culture building processes we've tried to create. One is the Pancha Mahabhutas, which I talked a little bit about. The frameworks from Gurukulas, and Indic metaphors of thought, which I also have talked about, and Indic knowledge, content, and themes. So it's not only processes, there is also content, which is important to look at. Yeah. So the next one. So, to look at we talked about culture building as very complex, and it has to evolve, it has to emerge. Many people will contribute to it, and it cannot be top-down instructions or what do you call it, motto or vision of the school, just mentioned somewhere, which will make the change. This is day in and day out work, So I don't know whether all of you would like to just read it and then I'll sum up some few things, Yeah, so as I said, like a lot of it is not about the idea, but it is the sharing and the co-holding, the constant, like there are meetings, there are sessions to discuss what we should do. There is, including people in creating some new aspects of, some learning programs for children. And so on, like so much that ongoing. Almost all of this is like ongoing work. Nature as a context, that's why we, in a way, we can call it process. It's not you have a textbook and that's good, but it is, a lot of it changes from day to day and year to year. Maybe certain things which don't change as in a big magical ways. For instance, the conceptual basis that we spell out, it's important that intellectually also it is understood why we do certain things. Because in the early years, we used to have teachers ask, why are you getting so crazy about the environment? Everybody knows about the environment. Why should we do so much here? It's like, it's like your pet dream. So why should you inflict it on the children? I've heard these kind of questions in the beginning, because we allow the questioning, we invite people to share and talk. So it is important to spell out that basis, and not everybody is aware of even some of the basic realities of the world around us, be it climate change or economic system or whatever it is. So it's a constant learning for the adult or the teachers community also. Then nature as a context. We thought we should have a lot of trees, and children shouldn't learn botany only from books. There should be a lot of trees. So we said we'll have more than 108 species of trees in the campus, as well as have organic gardening, for instance, and take them for field trips to maybe rainforests or other places, farms and various other places, so that they get some. There are limitations to what we can do. It's really not as good as living, the old education systems in India were originally close to forests or in forests, because that's probably the richest gene pool you have to learn from, So nature as a context, makes a lot of difference, and that gets woven into many lesson plans also. So I can't go into all of that, and we hope to be creating a website in which we put down a lot of these things, as well as even lesson plans, so that it can be of use to anybody who wants it, And yeah, content of learning, as we touched upon it already. So we have to, for the pride in our own culture, we need to look at how amazing ancient Indian mathematics was, and or astronomers. So many things were learned and studied, God knows how. I think I read somewhere that, for instance, the newly married people are supposed to look at, is it Arundhati, the star, which the Gemini, I think, the two stars which are supposed to be not one revolving around the other, but both revolving around, a common center, so to speak. And this was, in a way, probably intuited, because there were no telescopes then, and talked about so long ago. So it's something to be marveled at. And there are people, and there are Indians too today, but I remember, for instance, The Wonder That Was India. That's a book really worth reading if we want to, look at content for Indian learning, by Basham, B-A-S-H-A-M. I think that's how you pronounce it. Basham or something like that. So like that, there are many, many other authors today, more of them coming up, who are talking about how the kind of knowledge systems that existed long ago. And it's in a way much more than many other parts of the world, but yet we Indians, the most study sometimes I feel is done by others than by Indians. And we need to integrate it in our education in some way. Then the role of elders is something which is, I think, has been there in all traditional societies in the world. But the new authority, the authority of science, the authority of various systems and so on, has completely, pushed aside the role of elders in handing over wisdom. I'm not saying it's possible, easily to do it or bring back those same elders. Today, elder can be a youngster also who is more wise on some of these aspects. People who take it upon themselves to share and and foster a certain kind of understanding and wisdom. This role of elders is something which has been completely demolished by modern life, I would say. And how else can we, bring in a whole lot of the stories, whole lot of ideas, and share it with others? Yeah, it can be done through the formal education system too, but I think it's important to do. And in the school, we feel some of the older teachers, there are many, many teachers who have left the school, but they come back to the school, to invest in some way, to share something, to work on a workshop or various ways. So it's not, the formal relationship that we need of, somebody who's a professional teacher and then goes. And the nature of relationships is another thing that's important. And one of the things that all the students who graduate from Prakriya and come back, two things they remember very, very sharply. And one is about the relationship with the teachers. And the other is regarding sustainability, ideas of sustainability, And, we have not really talked and articulated so much about the Indic frameworks and so on. Maybe we should, but we have it embedded. So we find this community as a context is very important, and there are multiple ways of working on it. Of course, a lot of it is really sitting together, conversations, doing things together, having activities which are, which help people come together. So in the school, for instance, we have never taken any play or anything ready-made and just performed it. From scratch, from story, from, working at who will do what, and a whole lot of things, and evolve in the process of a group, trying to make that hubba, the play or whatever happen. It is not, and that process can be tremendous for community building, for sharing, for, and the themes, of course, can be both Indic or sustainability related and so on. And yeah, I think the others are pretty clear. The other process of why I'm calling it subtle learning is these kind of things, activities in which a lot more is embedded. The aim is not just what we put out, something perfectly for the parents or others to see, but it's a whole process of how we work on it, how so many people's creativity is mobilized, and so on and so forth. And nature of infrastructure, of course. I read an article by, Krishna Kumar, who used to be the famous Krishna Kumar, who was in NCERT and the big thinker in education in India. He was talking about how sad it is to see the so-called best schools have so much AC and so much, multi-story buildings and, so much in, swimming pools and so much computers and CCTV and the whole works, And he says, like, children actually learn better in a simpler environment. They, even when we have seen when the school buildings were still being built, the foundation, was dug out somewhere for a building. And there were many other places in the school to play. You will find a whole lot of children jumping into the foundation dugout, the whole dugout, and playing around in the mess, and rather than only in the playground proper. Children like the complex, I would say, or the children like the messy parts also. And a lot of play and a lot of fun happens there. But when you make everything so, so clean and neat and manicured gardens and whatnot, there is no place for the child to make a garden. So, I just thought of this article that I read somewhere. He says it's so sad. That's what education has come to, completely forgetting that children even are happier and learn better in a simpler environment. So I forgot to mention that amongst one of the Indic frameworks is also voluntary simplicity, to be simple in what we do, in how much. It's not a matter of spending money or not spending money, but it's a matter of one is, yes, there is a sustainability issue, but more than that, simplicity has an essential value for the human being. So we need simplicity in a school. So I think we'll go to the next. All sorts of things have to be worked with, is what I'm trying to say. And especially this bit about conversations and talking between teachers. I would say we are not able to do much. We are able to dream a lot. We are doing what we can, but I would say there's a lot more to do. And this riding to horses business is, the compulsion to do some bit of the syllabus, especially in like class 5 upwards and so on, makes it very difficult. And also the fact that so many teachers will take time to absorb this way of working. It's not, you cannot undo something that's been done in our minds overnight. It takes time. Yeah, next. I think I already spoke about Panchamahabhutas as a framework for learning, and thematic learning a little bit I spoke about, how you can, in place of different subjects, and you can learn through these 5 themes and in a more integrated way, in what is today called a more interdisciplinary way. And therefore it's also more enjoyable, and also children remember things better, they understand better. And it's like just living and walking around and learning things, but at the same time, the difference is they have to also learn to put things down in a book, because that is needed for the exams finally. So a major thing which is a core of our work in Prakriya as well as Bhoomi College is our self-exploration labs. So in those labs, there are multiple things we do. Just as in, even for the learning, it's not only the Panchabhutas. We, for instance, find the simple, nowadays what's popular, the multiple intelligences system is very useful, because that again gives you an acceptance of diversity, ways of learning and so on. Like this, many other things are also integrated, not only what's Indian. And similarly, in the self-exploration, there's a lot of work which has been, integrated from different parts of the world, but it is largely based on some parts of the Sankhya philosophy. And we also use the Panchabhuta, the psychological counterparts of the Panchabhutas. Like, for instance, Prithvi, I think if you go through the last one, the understanding nature's principle, you will get this. Prithvi is, in a way, life itself as we see it day in and day out, earth with so much of diversity in it. So diversity is an important psychological principle we talk about accepting it in accepting our diverse feelings or thoughts, accepting other people of different kinds and so on. And, which helps us deal with our need to be judgmental or need to, or very often somebody or the other who can't measure up in the school system feels small, has lower self-esteem. All these sort of multiple things are dealt with when we constantly talk about diversity. And Jal is about the flow, the relating, the self-regulation, relationships, and all that which is part of nature. Similarly, we need it as much in our psychological processes with each other. We need to look at it. If we get very rigid, the issue is, how do I self-regulate, and so on. Similarly, Vayu, interconnectedness. There is sometimes a tendency in us to sort of leave aside some sections of the school or some people or whatever. So how interconnectedness is a value in nature, and it's important, to connect with many aspects of life. Energy, infiniteness in a way is the, is a sacredness, the spiritual aspects of life and so on. So multiple things are dealt with through this framework. Another couple of things, the school shloka is based on the Panchamahabhutas and the 5 houses. We have 5 houses to have vertical, communities, children from different classes getting together periodically, and they are named after the Panchabhutas. Each of them has a tree, which is a tree for, Agni house or Prithvi house. So in multiple ways, this concept is really takes root in people's minds. That's what I'm trying to say. So ultimately, it is all about, I guess, nature, us being part of nature. So next one, Kalyani. So Indic metaphors of thought, gone through them already. So I'll just, apart from what I was talked about there, synthesis, simultaneity, all that we talked about, holistic view, unity in diversity. Many people talk about that as a reality in India. How do we work with that? And ecocentric view versus anthropocentric view. So some of these things are talked about in sessions. We work with them, and different teachers take them into the classroom in different ways. I would say again, in all of this, it's just an open-ended framework. Life, we can keep on working on this endlessly in so many different ways. So that is for Indic metaphors of thought. How only by talking and sharing and working with, gradually it sort of becomes a way of thinking about many things, and we find then it makes it a lot easier to work with our differences and work with our our own personal limitations, or our even irritation with somebody else's limitation, and so on and so forth. A whole lot of things can be dealt with. Next. Yeah. So as I said, mostly we've talked about the processes, but the framework of the Gurukula system, it's not so much that we can put the clock back and, get the Gurukula system. Very often when the people talk about the Gurukula system today, with things floating around in WhatsApp and social media, there's always a picture of a guru under the tree with some 10 sishyas sitting in front, That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about, the processes embedded in the system. We may never replicate that totally, or there may be no need to, but there are many other things which we can take from there as basic ideas of, and I think again, many of you who are in alternative schools in this group are already following it, so it's nothing new, but I'm just putting it because I hope this will reach people who are not in alternative schools also. So the Gurukula system, the essential part of it is a close relationship that the student has with the guru. So here it's close relationship between the teachers or the facilitators and children, and living and learning close to nature as much as possible. Now, many people have said, oh, we don't have so much space. Well, you can do something with organic gardening on a terrace. You can do something with walking in parks and trees. I mean, there's always a way to get close to nature if you want to. And voluntary simplicity, to have simple buildings, simple clothes, and, not really feel that your, the school's status or whatever is determined by how fancy you look. And in fact, we wish we were a lot simpler. It was very difficult because with that, again, with the limited land, we had to do multi-story in some places, even if it's only 2 or 3 stories. And we had a simple rule that no building should be taller than a nearby tree, So that made it clear that we had to have not more than 2, and in one building, 3 floors, including the ground floor. So another thing is, in a Gurukula system, there is, there's work people do. They live and learn. They don't just learn. So that's very difficult to do in the school, but yet we can. I'm afraid sometimes I myself feel it's a tokenism, but we try. And sometimes organic gardening, etc., has made a difference to some children when they go back and start organic gardens at home. So hands-on work, including cooking, Shramdan, all kinds of things of where you work. Now, this I would say we have a long way to go because of, again, the ICSE system. I hope the NEP cuts down the voluminous syllabus and we are able to do more interesting work of different kinds. Then experiential learning, real life projects is another thing that we try to work on. We worked with creating a pond, we worked with trying to understand how to work on a lake nearby. A lot of things like this. Again, as the school is filled up, as in, we have almost like 25 and 25 children in the high school. We are finding it more difficult because these are best done in small groups. But we can work with real life projects. That's the thing here, the Gurukula system. That work with real life issues, not just with what's in a book. And acceptance of diversity, we already talked about. Sharing of philosophical ideas and holistic view, all these things that go beyond the syllabus, as it were. And focus also on inner growth and outer growth, which we try to do in many ways, even from the smallest classes, when we have our circle time, when there are a lot of discussions and sharing about many things, about feelings, about what it meant to fight with somebody, what it meant to lose something, a whole range of things. There is space to talk about, and all that is important, we feel, to feel that that's also, something that mature people, adults, will share and talk. And we often find today a whole lot of problems in life, a whole lot of mental illness and so on, is because people don't have others to talk to. And that's the first step in the inner growth part. It can be more and more as we go. Yoga, of course, and many other things. So again, we are talking about how to take thoughts and ideas from frameworks from a system and use it, and not get caught with just glorifying the Gurukula system or completely avoiding it. Yeah, next. This we went over. So I think an important thing to work with is this ecocentric view versus anthropocentric view. We do a lot of things to work on it. In the higher classes, we bring in the Gaia theory. The book Gaia by James Lovelock, who talked about how over the 3.5 billion years, the Earth evolved with a constant interaction between what is so-called non-living things and living things to make conditions on Earth livable for life. Unlike many other planets, what is special about Earth? And these kind of things, when you do, I think gradually your focus is not on the great achievements of human beings, but also on how nature, Earth is, a lot easier for us to work with than the whole, let's say, universe or the galaxies and so on. So it's important to get a more holistic picture and not just say, my neighborhood is this or my space is this, and to have a wider thinking on some of these things. Yeah, next. So this is the content part of it. As I said, the theater and habbas, like we've had habbas that we put together on, for instance, like a Ramayana for the children on Earth, on magical Earth. We had one called Sankhya Sandhya, which was all about the ancient Indian mathematician, which was done in a fun way. The children go on a time machine back to the time of Bhaskaracharya or Aryabhatta and have conversations with them. And, things like that, which make it a fun thing for people to work. And it's not just what is started out with the script, but how people add things and so on. So, and also we have something called the Crafts Utsav, which many others do. I think the KFI schools do, and others also have craft as an important part. It's important in the Indian system. It was not in rural areas. The next to agriculture, the largest income provider, employment provider is craft. Not income provider, employment provider is craft, you know. And craft is also very important. And I think, like Gandhiji said, we use this statement when we work on the craft utsav and so on, that India needs production by the masses, not mass production. And it's not hit on all of us, you know, strongly enough that this mass production is actually depriving people of so many jobs for the sake of some fancy goods, which and then it creates so much of social unrest, or the government trying to make, you know, what do you call it, people feel quite worthless, as it were, by giving, you know, welfare doles and whatnot. You know, I was just seeing yesterday that in the US, they have set apart so many trillion, 1.3 trillion or whatever, to give something the equivalent of 32,000 per month for every unemployed person there. You know, this is what happens to nations, to societies, including, we are also headed that way, when we have more and more mass production systems and more people thrown out of jobs or without employment to do, not jobs, without livelihoods. So we feel, for all these reasons also, this is the conceptual basis of doing crafts work, which also we talk about to teachers and children, not just say making things with the hands. I think that intellectual understanding of these things is also important. Food and health is another important area. Canteen, we try to follow these rules pretty strictly, although everybody is used to eating a lot of more other foods, junk foods and so on. We try to share that school is one place easy to follow rules. We bring in millets, we avoid sugar, we have jaggery, we have so many little things, which again, in practice and by actual living it out, it may stay with children a lot more. These are some of the kind of things that we bring in, other than what is brought in through the subjects in classrooms, like science, maths. There is a lot that can be brought into the classroom also, but this is apart from that, you know. So that's it. Yeah. Next one. I think we are reaching an end of our... No, while we talk about this, like a lot of things from the Indic culture, I think we also have to look at what is lacking. It's not been lacking forever, but I think like questioning systems and authority, we seem to be pretty low on, at least today. Although they say in ancient India, debating and questioning was a big thing, big method of learning in Nalanda and Takshashila and so on. But today we find we have become too docile. We are not questioning the economic system enough. We're not questioning the education system. I think that is something we need to add on. And similarly, perhaps because of the kind of poverty that's inflicted on us through repeated invasions and what do you call it, colonization and so on, there's a lot more insecurity, and giving and sharing, you know, is sort of insufficient in the culture, and respect for hands-on work. So we feel that these are also things which may not be strong aspects of the Indic culture, but we need to work with in, you know. So that's it. So I'll close here, and any other responses or questions will be good.
Thank you, Seetha. It's really, really insightful. There is a question from Atreyi. I don't know if Atreyi is still on the talk. Would you like to ask your question, Atreyi?
Yes, namaskar. I'll just read out my question to all of you.
Yeah.
I think it might just be already answered. If the nation state continues in its current form, how can there be hope for smaller, slower, evolving, more natural learning to emerge, except as alternatives? Strangely, religion-powered right-wing politics talks of Indic systems of learning, which I say always, but because that's how it's portrayed, one-on-one and customized, and yet the system flattens cultures, contexts, all plurality through central processes. non-religious left also ends up somewhat endorsing the other central systems. Please comment on this, Seetha ma'am.
Well, I don't have much to say about it except that, the politicizing of education, and non-questioning of the politics of the British, has done such terrible things to our education system. I would rather look at, those individuals who care for, some basics about the culture. Not about saying, this is better, that is better, but about integrating a whole lot of things as per the wisdom of the Indic frameworks. I would rather go by that because we really don't know how even to deal with these kind of political issues. Because I don't agree that you need to politicize it, but education is a big tool in the hands of governments, not only here, around the world.
Yes.
So one feels very helpless about it. Um, I'm not able to say much more.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
In question from Neeraja. Neeraja, would you like to speak?
Yeah. Hi, Seetha. This is a question I carry with me. I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but I'm just wondering, why is it that despite our knowing the value of leisure and time to pause and reflect, in almost every workplace, in almost every school, teachers are so hard-pressed for time to pause and reflect? What do you think is the reason for that?
I think all of us know the reason for that, Neeraja. We have a crazy, education system which spells out the, curriculum, and on top of that, there is an exam orientation which creates such a compulsion and frenzy about having to complete the syllabus, and and every child, even though the child may hate mathematics, but still something has to be stuffed into him, or her. That's the system we have. So I think we are suffering the consequences of that, and we have to sort of, like one friend of ours said, today in the economic system, we have to do things and work like, the grass that grows in the cracks of the concrete. It's like that in school too. We have to do this reflection work like, like grass or weeds that grow in the cracks of the concrete of the education system. And I'm only hoping they are talking about NEP is going to cut down certain things, the voluminous syllabus, as it were. I hope so. And I think also, unfortunately, not many of the state board schools, are highly favored by people who want to think and work and do things. And so what happens is a state board exam actually is a much better one to find this time for reflection. But it's like, all the people who want to do good work think they largely rush towards ICSE, CBSE kind of, IGCSE kind of syllabus. So sometimes we wish that we had opted for a, state board syllabus instead of ICSE. But in addition to opting for a particular syllabus, we also have to have the intention, the intention to want to understand, want to reflect, and so on. Now, that intention, people have to inspire each other in a school system. And we find when that happens, people are doing that. Like right now, for instance, in the last 2-3 months, we have begun something called a Prakriya renewal program. The COVID came in a way we are, made use of it to some extent. That's the in-between spare time that we get to relook at a lot of things we are doing, to reflect, to think through, And we've had series of meetings and interviews with almost everybody. interviews even with the bus drivers and the akkas, other support staff, as well as with the teachers and principal and everybody, as well as we have a group of us. I mentioned the elders. I could say more or less the elders of Prakriya who don't have full-time responsibility as teachers are the ones who are spearheading this process. So we are doing it like in the cracks of the concrete.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, Bani.
Yeah. Thanks, Seetha ji, to hear such a lovely talk. It was very thought-provoking. And I also think like how to bring in these cultures in our Indian education system is a lot to think about. And good to see that you have raised this question. And let's hope, like Poorna also believes in most of the system that you people are doing, and hope to have a good relationship and build on this. And thank you once again for being part of the Samaagama. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I've met you.
Yeah, I was Aditi's and
yeah, you taught my children.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. Sure. I mean, it would be nice to continue this conversation, and in some way. When it comes to education system at large, I really feel very helpless. So we can work in in individual schools and spaces. The other one, maybe the next generation, somebody has to take it forward. Yeah.
Hi, Seetha. This is Chitra here. I was just thinking when Nija was asking about how do you, do the reflection. So having worked with you, I believe that it needs to be systemized in a way. So we would have these long institutional meets and, sessions where we would actually sit and reflect, whether it is what is the meaning of the school, what is the value system, what are we doing over here. And in a sense, the school had created systems which forced us to reflect and therefore deepen our understanding. So I just wanted to share that. It doesn't come if you leave it to individuals sometimes till it becomes a habit. And this was a system that for me was very meaningful, where we did a lot of reflection work. Yeah.
Thank you, Chitra. I mean, I really thank you for bringing this in because, like what Nirja says, like I sometimes see more of like what more can happen rather than what has happened. So I agree that we need, every school needs to create these systems and spaces also. So the institutional mates especially, I'd just like to say another word about it. We don't look at people, you ask somebody to draw some institution, they'll usually draw a wall, gate, and a big building at the back. That's not what we call institution, but what has been instituted in the minds of people. So institutions in the minds of people, you need meetings to sit and talk about and deal with it. And if the system creates the time, we have these 3 institutional meet, we have this retreat every year or something like that, it happens. And it's possible to find the time, but I agree with you totally that the school has to design it. Maybe naturally it doesn't happen for yet another reason. Individual, like you said, leaving it to individuals doesn't really always work. A few individuals maybe take upon that reflection work on their own. They look for people to talk to and whatnot. But for many, and especially in cities, a lot of schools have women working, in the schools. And many women actually choose to become teachers because of the working hours are lesser, because they need to go back home and look after their children and house and so on. So neither does the, this kind of work is not a way of life sometimes for many people. They have to look after something else back home. And that, I think, is also another reason, why individuals on their own don't gravitate towards more reflection and so on. Yeah, thanks, Chitra.
Just to add, also the effort in these meetings would also veer towards the community building, as you've spoken about. And as the community strengthens and your relationships strengthen, then in my experience, I would find so many more spaces to reflect with others. Or there would be conversations which would create reflection within myself. And I guess one thing I've realized, it's a very long process, before you reach that level of saying, how do we reflect? So yeah, for that, I would definitely say thank you, Seetha. Prakriya has definitely taught me that.
Thanks. But just to add one more thing, in our very first brochure, we had put this quote. I forget whom it is, but who said it. Learning, education should be more akin to lighting a fire than collecting in bucketfuls. Like we talked about the content and process. We can also talk about the content and the energizing processes. So I think if we talk about issues that are important for human beings, important for each human being, that's why the self-exploration is important. It changes me, the way I look at something in my life. And it's real life for that person. It's not some theory that is being learned. And when we do that, I think people will keep alive that conversation, like you're saying. Even after that group is, that time for that institutional meet is over, in 2s and 3s and small groups, people keep chatting about these things. That reflection takes a life of its own, and that happens only when the issues are both universal and of individual value. When these two are there, learning becomes like lighting a fire.
So actually, there's a question from one of the parent. Yeah, like Nirja said, it will be nice if there is an in-service teacher development curriculum. And to that, one parent says, one parent says, it'll be possibly nice if all alternative spaces come together and organize some retreat programs or stuff like that for parents or teachers or anybody who is interested. So maybe all people here, Seetha or Indira or Nirja or anybody here who are experienced, maybe you should all guide us. And yeah. So, and are there any, it's a request from it, it's not a question or anything. And
I have one thing to say about that. In our work in self-exploration, we talk about ways of working with depth and ways of working with what we call a cafeteria method. The cafeteria method is I go to a cafeteria, I take one Chinese dish and one Indian and one something and I put it all in my plate. Now, both for Indic as an Indic framework, as well as something that can be more functional, I would prefer it if, let's say, either one individual school does something, I'm willing to, we are willing to go join them and learn what they're doing, or even a small group really work hard to cohere with each other and then offer something. I have seen these conferences where there are 15 schools and 15 different thoughts coming out, and how to make things better or whatever in a school.
So whoever has questions or, if you want to converse more, you could always mail to samaagama@poorna.in.
While we are waiting for Seetha, I was just thinking over what Srikar has written about like-minded schools. I think this kind of open forum is an idea to actually start some conversations, and hopefully, like Seetha said, it won't end with with just this forum. The talks will also be recorded and shared both on YouTube and directly. If you ask for a recording, we'll send you a recording. But the idea is to, take the thoughts forward and reflect in whatever community you're part of, and also build communities by providing opportunities for people to meet and interact with each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Indira. So I was actually thinking more on the lines of the children and the parents. We often come across really a variety of other families, and many times what happens is, I mean, my son basically thinks that, oh yeah, those people are doing things differently. So why are we not doing it like them, or stuff like that. So if we get to meet more people who are doing similar things, we get a sense of pride, also a sense of safety in some sense. We are doing things right.
Yeah, true. I can empathize with that, and I think it could be both formal and informal. I mean, if parents can want to organize a forum and look for experiences from different schools, I think that's also a way forward, and build these networks and connections. I think that's one way to go about it. And as one explores, one comes across a lot of positive action that is being done, and this Indic framework will be either explicit or implicit in many of the actions that people are doing. And I liked what Seetha said, that part of the Indic framework is synthesis, or what I like to think of as syncretism, that where you're able to absorb from many different sources. I can't help but remember, I think it was Gandhiji who said, "Let the winds of all cultures blow into my house, but I refuse to be blown down or blown away." I'm probably not quoting it exactly correct, but that's the essence of what he had said in one context. So thank you. Seetha is back. Yeah.
Seetha ji, it was a very thought-provoking discussion, and it was actually very interesting, the kind of work you were doing and all. So I hope all of you have enjoyed the talk, and I'm sure all of you would go back with some questions in mind on how, I mean, at least on how we can do things, maybe not differently, do the right things. More than being different, how can we do the right things, at least in all the wake of this climate crisis and all of that. So yeah, it was a nice talk, and I thank you very much for accepting our invitation and yes, sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks.
Yes,
Yeah.
so shall we call it? Yes.
Yeah, we all thank you, Seetha, on behalf of Poorna family, and also the people who participated today, giving the precious time. We thank you all. Yeah, it was great having this conversation, and let's see how we can carry forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kalyani, Poorna, and thank you all of you. Thank you so much.